So the next chapter talks about serial murder, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that is distinct from mass and spree murder. This term is first introduced around 1980, and it's commonly used to describe someone who kills multiple victims at different times, in different places, and there's a cooling off period in between the killings. During that cool down period, they often return to their normal lives and routines. The FBI definition requires at least 3 killings, but again, there's some other people who are using 4 as their definition. The FBI has recently begun to operate under the premise that when they see 2 separate killings over time committed by the same offender, that it is likely that this person will continue to keep killing and may be a serial killer. So other experts add some other distinctions for serial murderers. So Fox and Levin say they kill with increasing brutality, stalk their victims, and generally do not stop until caught. Others distinguish them based on their motivation, whether or not they're killing for profit or there's a sexual component. This textbook, however, uses the FBI approach. So as early as the 1400s, we've seen serial killers. Gilles de Rais killed as many as 200 people between the ages of 6 and 20. He spent 10 years torturing victims. He would kidnap, torture, rape, and kill them. He would ejaculate on their bloodied and tortured bodies as well. He was sentenced to death and was hanged and burned. Countess Elizabeth Bathory in 1600 believed she had found the secret to youthful beauty when blood from a servant girl splashed onto her hand. She had the girl killed and her blood drained so she could bathe in it. With the help of servants, she murdered as many as 650 young women over 10 years. Her servants were executed for their role in the murders while she was imprisoned. So some believe that the number of serial killings has been increasing during the 20th century. But in the early 1980s, the media reported there were as many as 5,000 serial killer victims each year. But this is an extreme exaggeration. In 1992, the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime determined there were 350 serial killers in the U.S. between 1960 and 1991. And they were suspected to have killed just over 3,000 victims, or about 100 victims per year. How many are actually currently practicing as serial killers vary. Some say as 35, some say as many as 500. States that are known for an abundance of serial killers include California, Florida, New York, Texas, Illinois, Georgia, and Ohio, while states with the highest rate of serial murders include Alaska, Delaware, Idaho, Kansas. That's probably supposed to be Nebraska, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Utah, Vermont, and Wyoming. From 82 to 91, there were 58 serial killers operating in England and Wales, and it is probably about 2 serial killers operating at any given time in those countries. Between 89 and 93, there were 3 serial killer clusters in Australia. In 2000, 2 men were arrested in South Africa for killing 51 people over a 3-year period. In 1997, Moses Sithole was sentenced to more than 2,400 years for 38 murders in South Africa. There have been almost 50 serial killers in South Africa in the past 2 decades. So this South Africa then is one of the top 5 countries with the most serial killers. There are many exceptions to the profile of serial killers, but most tend to be lower class white males in their late 20s or 30s. Who do serial killers kill? They tend to kill people who are strangers to them. And in a study of about 25, 30-year period, Hickey found that 91.5% of male serial killers killed at least one stranger. They tend to seek out vulnerable people who are not likely to be reported as missing. So this includes migrants, runaways, prostitutes, and it may be a while then before these victims are reported missing, if they're reported missing at all. Children, women, and gay men are also sought out by serial killers to feed their particular fantasies or because they're believed to be easy to overpower and control. Serial killers compared to single murderers are more likely to kill women than men and more likely to kill strangers. Young women who were alone and children account for most of the strangers sought out by serial killers. Amongst those victims who are acquaintances, friends and neighbors were the most common, as well as waitresses and prostitutes. Amongst victims who are family members, children are the most common. Female serial killers, however, tend to kill people that they actually know, children, spouses, elderly, or young people in their care. Most serial killers average about 7 to 12 victims. So those killed by a serial killer are more likely to be killed in ways other than a gun. So male serial killers tend to strangle victims. They may also beat, shoot, or inject their victims. The reason they tend to not use guns is because it takes away part of the pleasure. So many of these killers are killing for power, or they are sadistic and they're killing for the pleasure that they get from torturing someone else. Some kill in teams, but this accounts for only about 20% of all serial killers. Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono were cousins that killed it together. Female serial killers tend to use poison, but they may also shoot, suffocate, or inject their victims. And when they kill together, they tend to operate more like male serial killers. Since the 80s, African Americans are slightly overrepresented among serial killers, with them being about 25% of killers between 1980 and 2005. 0.8% of Egger's sample were Cyan and 7% were Latino. That should be Asian. Amongst female serial killers, whites were overrepresented, and blacks, Latinas, and Asians were underrepresented. Jenkins suggests that serial murder by blacks may be underreported because of law enforcement practices. Victimization is often interracial, and institutionalized and individual racism may lead police to take cases involving blacks less seriously. It's very rare for a serial killer to be under the age of 20. Jeffrey Dahmer, however, killed his first victim at the age of 18. And in the 1870s in Boston, Jesse Pomeroy was arrested at the age of 14 for torturing and murdering children. In 1968, as we spoke about before, 10-year-old Mary Flora Bell killed 2 young boys in 2 separate incidents in England. There's been several attempts to classify serial killers since the 80s. Hazelwood and Douglas talk about organized and disorganized killers. An organized crime scene suggests that the killer carefully planned and executed the murder. They're likely to exercise power over the victim by using restraints and raping or torturing the victim while still alive. Disorganized killings appear to have been spontaneous and chaotic, and they're more likely to perform sexual acts on the victim after death and leave evidence of weapons at the scene. These killers operate on a continuum as opposed to a dyad, and they become more disorganized as their criminal career advances. Holmes and DeBurger talk about visionary, missionary, and hedonistic killers. Visionary killers kill because of visions that are believed to be the result of some type of psychosis, for example, the Son of Sam, while missionary killers kill to do away with certain types of people. Hedonistic killers kill for the pleasure obtained from the process of killing. These include lust murderers who kill for sexual pleasure, thrill-oriented killers who kill for excitement, comfort-oriented killers who kill for benefits received from killing, and power and control killers who derive pleasure from power and control of their victims. Hickey talked about those that are based on their geographic mobility. Do they tend to travel and kill in several states? Are they more local, killing in one specific region? Or are they place-specific, killing in one specific site? Mitchell recognizes a criminality dimension and talks about strictly amateur killers where serial murder is their only crime. Killer amateurs who commit other crimes more often than murder. Career criminals who kill, they kill as part of their other criminal activity. And professional killers who kill for pay. Keppel and Walter focused on sexual serial homicide. They talk about power assertive and power reassurance. Sexual serial offenders. Power assertive offenders, the rape is planned but the murder is not. Whereas power reassurance are motivated by power and plans the rape but not the murder. Anger retaliatory and anger excitation offenders. Anger retaliatory offenders plan both the rape and the murder, whereas anger excitations also plan both the rape and the murder. An anger retaliatory offender is attacking a victim to seek revenge, while the anger excitation killer is driven by anger. They often torture their victims and perhaps mutilate them. There's also a series of typologies of female serial killers. Black widows are often intelligent and manipulative. They methodically plan and kill one individual after another, and those people are usually a spouse or other family members. Angels of death, we often hear these stories about like a nurse or someone in the medical field. These are people who kill those who rely on them for medical attention. Sexual predators are the most controversial in Kelleher and Kelleher's typology. This is a woman who systematically murders others in what are known to be clear acts of sexual homicide. A revenge serial killer kills for revenge, while others may kill for profit. Murder is basically done for profit, and they act alone and seek out non-family members. Team killers kill with another partner, and then there are ones where we are concerned about whether or not the offender is considered legally sane. Then there are two categories. There's unexplained, which is sort of a leftover catch-all category, and unsolved. These are unsolved cases where we don't know who the offender is, but it might be a woman. So there's a variety of theories about serial killers. Many believe they grew up in single-parent homes and were adopted. Many are victims of abuse or neglect. Some had severe head injuries. Some had parents who were addicted to drugs and alcohol. We talked about the McDonald triad before. But these don't really explain why serial killers kill. Because many people experience these hardships, but they don't go on to become offenders, let alone serial killers. So integrated theories work best, and Mitchell proposed an integrated model that he calls diathesis stress syndrome. And basically, Mitchell argues that the sociocultural environment and one's home situation interact with biological factors, such as a predisposition to violence. This syndrome then leads to psychological problems, including cognitive difficulties and maybe even psychiatric illness. Life stressors may then lead to the commission of a homicide. Once the offender realizes that the killing brings relief, they may relive that in their minds, and then the cycle continues anew. So what happens to serial killers in court? Most are incarcerated or sentenced to death. So in Hickey's study, just under a third of the killers were sentenced to death. Nearly a half were sentenced to prison, and only 3% were confined to a mental institution. So while we tend to think of serial killers as being crazy, they're often not actually mentally ill. Some offenders are killed in prison, like Dahmer, and only 19% of female serial killers were sentenced to death. And of those, very few were actually executed. And that wraps up the chapter on serial murder.